many of us are afraid of snakes? It's natural. It's a part of human process, right? To be afraid of that which can harm us. How many of us know, excluding what I talked about earlier, that snakes are actually much more afraid of you than you are of them? How many of us even further know that a snake doesn't want to bite you? I learned a valuable lesson as it relates to this when I became a snake keeper. You see, I keep non-venomous snakes in my house that look like they could scare some people, and they do scare some people, but they actually have never bitten me. And how many of you would be surprised to know that I can tell when somebody is likely to get bitten by one of my snakes? I can tell because of the way they move and the way they interact with them. I've never had a guest get bitten by them because when I start to see that behavior, take them away, right? Anxiety and fear are natural emotions of all animals because it's part of what made them survive. And how many of us can recall a moment where fear, whether of God or someone else, was attempted to be used to get you to conform or capitulate to a desire made known to you? Fear is an emotion handed down to us through a process of natural selection. Because as you can imagine, those that were not afraid, those humans that were not afraid of going out by themselves, they didn't quite make it, right? Fear as a guide is a distinction, or I would rather make a distinction between fear as a guide and fear as simply an emotion. Fear helped us get to where we are today because it helped our ancestors survive. But fear as a guide helps my friends get bit by snakes, which, if it were a venomous one, wouldn't help them survive, right? Today's first reading talks of how allowing fear as a guide caused death. Peter giving his homily to his followers, addressing those very people who were in the group screaming, right? We hear in John's Gospel, execute him, are now being addressed in a way that tells them, your fear led to the death of Christ. Under Pilate, you caused the execution. Fear has consequences. This kind of fear, I think, actually boils down to just our fear of change and of that which is different. Jesus represented a change. He represented an alteration of the status quo. He represented a destruction of the powers that be. This kind of fear, though, that led to his death is devastating to the world in many ways. We can think of the Holocaust. We can think of every genocide. We can think of our own sins as Christians, as Catholics, in our persecution of Jewish people in the Middle Ages, in our persecution of Protestants in various places where Catholics reign. But you see, God does not leave us alone with this fear. The message of Christ is actually a message of love. It's a message of reorientation. That change that he represents, that destruction of the powers that be, is also a gift of a new compass. You see, in the ancient world, fear reigned. Fear of the different, fear of that which is different allowed for the killing of the tribes, of the countries that weren't your own. It allowed for the conquering of the places that you needed resources from. It was the reason the Romans had taken over most of Judah, calling it superstitious and ignorant. They had used fear, or fear as justification, to say they need to be subjugated. But the message of Christ was no, no, no. We have love as our compass. And even as we destroy the power that is overtaking us, we don't do it with a sword and with killing and with the same sort of other rising that was done to us. Our gospel reading today tells us that we are called to be witnesses of Christ in the world, of this love in the world. That this love is transformative to the point that Peter tells us that even though you partook in the death and crucifixion of Christ, you can be restored through this love. In other words, do not fear, Christ is here. Our first reading today, though addressed to that very congregation, or the very group of people who allowed fear to guide them, is given to us so that we can see that no matter what you've done, no matter the great wound you have, you can also choose to allow love to be your North Star. No matter who you are and where you've been, today and every day, God reaches out to you in love and says, restoration is possible. Because our gift from God, our likeness to God, is that we have the ability to choose, to think, to rationalize. That snake has no choice other than to allow fear to be its compass. It's our responsibility handed to us in Genesis to tend to the earth, to understand that our mind allows us to choose a different compass. Our mind allows us to choose the compass of love. Brothers and sisters, God's love is free. All God asks is that you share it. All God asks is that you help in the restoration of others and of this world to God's love. Amen.